Hello everybody, welcome to our video today. Today I'm going to be talking to you about boundaries and work-life balance as part of the Mental Health Awareness Week this week. We really hope that this topic will be interesting to you and that it will kind of help you to strike that balance in your personal and professional life as well. So today we're going to be talking about quite a few different things. So first we're going to cover what are boundaries. Then we're going to go on to talk about different types of boundaries and what they might look like. Why boundaries are important. So, why are we suggesting that you kind of come up with some boundaries for yourself? And then we're going to talk more about boundaries and work specifically. So some examples of work boundaries, some kind of maybe not so good examples, and then kind of how we can reframe those a little bit as well. And at the end, I'm just going to kind of go through some final top tips as well to help you in coming up with your own boundaries. And yeah, so I hope that sounds good. So first of all, we've got what are boundaries. So boundaries can be physical or emotional, so it can be something tangible or again it can be more emotional. And they can range quite a bit, so they could be quite loose boundaries or they can be quite strict or rigid boundaries. It depends on the person, it depends on the topic, but typically healthy boundaries would fall somewhere in between that. So sometimes we want to set that guideline, but we still want to be able to kind of compromise a little bit and be a little bit flexible to certain situations as well. Boundaries is how we teach others to treat us, so it's kind of that line between what is and isn't acceptable. So similar really to kind of a guideline essentially. So boundary setting can be applied to all aspects of life. It can literally apply to anything, so from work and kind of personal life, relationships as well. And they do require clear communication. So often, you might have heard of boundaries before, and sometimes people think, they're about being really strict and kind of a bit rude sometimes, and being really kind of abrupt and upfront, but they don't necessarily need to be. They can be really polite. It's more just about speaking up, setting a guideline for the things that are really important to you, and kind of trying to keep that structure to be able to maintain your own well-being. So they're just a tool really, I think, to help us to strike that balance. And of course boundaries will vary from person to person, so and over time as well, so they're going to change with us as we change, and also in different generations they will vary a bit as well. So an example where this could be the case, I was thinking about kind of phones and technology. So in some younger generations, they typically prefer, if you're going to call somebody, that it's quite normal now to kind of text before, drop a message and say, oh, do you mind if I call, are you free, to give them a heads up. But in a lot of older generations, that's just not a thing. Maybe texting wasn't as much of a thing and they just call straight away. So some younger generations may even find that rude, whereas people from older generations might not even consider it unless it's mentioned. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. Try and make things as clear as possible, and yeah, just stop that confusion and that frustration that we can sometimes have. So moving on to different types of boundaries. As I mentioned, it can really apply to anything in your life, anything that you think is important and that you want to set boundaries around. So one example of that is could be physical. So it could be things to do with touch, for example. So are you okay with people hugging you when you meet them, or would you rather shake hands? It can be about personal space. It could be around food and drinks that you're happy to consume or that you're happy to have in your house. And it can also be around rest as well. So how much rest you need, and how you kind of allocate that and make sure that you're getting that rest as well. Next, so it could be emotional. So this could be something around sharing. So it could be, if you're speaking to a friend and you're willing to open up to them and confide in them, that you're expecting them to keep it to themselves and not tell somebody else. Otherwise, in the future, you won't feel comfortable to share that with them. So it can be around privacy. It can be around love and relationships as well. So again, essentially just thinking of those guidelines of how you want to be treated in that relationship. It can also be intellectual, so this I guess is a bit more around thoughts, ideas, how we kind of view the world, our opinions about different topics, and also handling conflict as well. So say, you know, perhaps you have a family member who they have quite strong different opinions to yourself, and when you see them, these topics come up, and perhaps you feel like they're not very respectful, and maybe they raise their voice. So a type of boundary, it could be, you know, you saying, I'm happy to kind of debate these discussions and have different opinions, but if you raise your voice, I'm not going to join in with the conversation. So things like that. Material, financial boundaries, so finances, sharing items, if you're going to share things with somebody, how much are you happy, you know, how much notice do you want, when do you want that item back, so on, and again around our home as well. So say if you have children, perhaps you're happy for them to have friends round, but maybe you want them to let you know at least the day before, so you're not coming home and finding loads of teenagers all in your house. So it could be things like that too. Time, so time is a big one, so how you spend your time, how you kind of again allocate that in your life for your well-being, and this links a lot to work hours as well, which we'll talk a lot more about in the next few slides. So kind of managing your time and sticking to that. And last but not least, we've got social media and technology. So this could be things like, do you have a private or a personal social media account? What are you happy to share on there? Are you happy to share things with you about your kids or about your relationships? Again, kind of could have boundaries around screen time, no phones at, you know, the table, things like that. That can all kind of come under boundaries as well. So really important is, you know, why are boundaries important? Why are we telling you this? Why should we care about boundaries? And there's quite a lot of reasons really, but one of those is for your mental health. So setting those boundaries, having those guidelines help to protect your time and your energy and your well-being, and it can help prevent us from feeling burnt out in a lot of situations, whether that's again at work or in our personal lives as well, if we feel we're giving too much out. Again, it can really benefit our physical health as well. So of course our mental health and our physical health are linked. But if we're making sure we've got enough time to get suitable sleep, we're kind of looking after ourselves, we're eating well, eating regularly, we're managing our time well. So hopefully we might be fitting in some movement in there. Hopefully it will be benefiting our physical health and will help us to prevent illness as well. In terms of, I guess, kind of work, linking it to work, it can definitely help to prevent or reduce absences. So again, linking to burnout. So if people are taking on too much at work, if they've not got those boundaries, that distinction between, you know, working hours and home life, how that can affect our mental and physical health. So it can definitely help with that. And of course, if we're setting clear boundaries at work and we're communicating clearly and respectfully with our team, then it can make us feel happy. So we're more likely to stay with our team and our job as well. Again, personal lives. So again, kind of time is a good one to kind of link things to. It's quite a clear one. So if we're managing our workload, we're kind of got that boundary around working hours and time. We can make sure that we've got that time for our personal lives as well in the evenings or at the weekends. So it will benefit relationships, our time to, you know, do things that we enjoy, like hobbies, as well. And next we've got knowing your value. So I think this one's really important. So of course, you know, there's always going to be times in life where, again, we have to be a little bit flexible with our boundaries. But an example of this could be, you know, say your contracted hours are 9 to 5 and you are working hours extra every evening, you're working at the weekend. And if you work out, you know, what that means you're being paid per hour, it's probably a lot less than what you're supposed to be getting if you worked your contracted hours. So it's just kind of thinking about that and thinking of it in terms of your value. What is your time worth, and are you willing to give over that amount of your time as well? And a really, really important one when it comes to boundaries is people pleasing and resentment. So this is kind of one of the most important factors of why boundaries can be so helpful, really. Because often when we want to please other people, we don't want to say no, we want to get things done, and we want to just try and do everything for everybody, and sometimes at the expense of ourselves. But what that can mean is that we do feel stressed, and sometimes we'll feel frustrated with other people for putting us in that position. We can kind of feel agitated. It can affect our relationships, and it can cause a lot of conflict as well, especially if it goes on for a prolonged amount of time, and then we kind of burst out eventually once we can't take it anymore. So although we want to help, we want to do the best we can, often setting boundaries and kind of being clear about what we can and can't do, and looking after our own health, it means that that's less likely to happen because we're not holding all that in and that frustration in as well. And often other people may not realise as well that that's how we're feeling if we haven't expressed it too. So hopefully that helps to show you why boundaries can be so important. So moving on to think a bit more specifically about boundaries and work, because that's what we're kind of talking about today, about having that work-life balance. So being a workaholic, it is easier than ever. We really glorify being busy in our society, and it's kind of a status thing, saying, oh, we're so busy, we're so busy. And I think some of us, we're starting to realise, that it's not all glamorous, and it is having an impact on our health, but we've still got quite a long way to go. Our worth, of course, is attached to our jobs, it's attached to our finances, naturally it is. So of course, again, we want to do well at work, we want to succeed at work, and we give a lot of ourselves to that. But of course, our worth isn't all tied up in that, or hopefully it isn't anyway. There's a lot more to our lives than just our work as well. So just kind of remembering that a little bit sometimes as well. And technology, I think technology is a big challenge. So to an extent now, with phones, with laptops, we're kind of expected to always be available in a way. Say we worked in a factory or something like that, and all the work that we had to do, we could only do it if we were there in person. But now, if you've got your phone at home, you've got your laptop at home, someone needs something doing, it's harder to say, actually I'm going to wait until tomorrow, or I'm going to wait until after the weekend, because it is close and it's there, and it, we kind of feel like we have to come up with excuses sometimes. And also, it is a really slippery slope. So I think this is a really important thing to bear in mind, that once we kind of let down our boundaries, and we start working extra, doing things that maybe we're not happy to do long term, it can become really hard to stop, because people can expect that we're going to be there, and that we're going to be answering our phone at this time and that time, and different things like that. So it can feel tempting to kind of do certain things, but just be a little bit careful about that, because sometimes it can be harder to kind of go back and correct those changes in boundaries. And another really important one as well is to role model. So when you set boundaries and other people see you setting boundaries, it can make it a lot easier for them to feel like they can do the same as well. So, if you're always working loads extra, and you're never saying, oh no, I haven't got capacity to do this, for example, the rest of your team are going to find it really hard to say that they can't do things. So it can be hard, especially if you feel like you're the first one saying that. It can feel really scary, but probably everyone else will be happy that you have, because it opens the door for them to find more of that work-life balance as well. And just a little note to acknowledge that setting boundaries at work can feel difficult. Of course, most of us need to work, we need the money, we want that purpose, we want to get along with our colleagues and our managers, and we want to feel like we're doing a good job and succeed. So of course it can feel scary, but again, this is nothing about being rude, it's nothing about upsetting people, it's just finding that balance. And again, hopefully it will benefit everybody overall, because you'll be in a better mindset. You won't have that conflict, hopefully, if there's not that resentment there. Everybody's on the same page, and everybody's being open. So those are a few things to bear in mind. So next, I thought it would be helpful perhaps if we go through a few examples of what can happen at work when kind of we don't particularly have boundaries, or maybe we haven't really thought about it, we haven't thought ahead. So I'll read these out. So first we've got Julie starts a new job. It takes about a couple of weeks for Julie to get her work phone. In the meantime, people are asking for her number. Julie gives a couple of people her personal number for the time being because she wants to give a good impression. But now months on, she's constantly being called and texted on her personal phone. This is making her feel on edge during her lunch break, and it's causing arguments with her partner as she's always on her phone. As she even sometimes will receive a call at a weekend as well when she's got her phone with her. So she's also starting to resent her colleagues because of this, and kind of tensions building a little bit. But Julie's colleagues actually don't realise that this is a problem because she always answers, she always replies, and she seems happy to, and she hasn't actually mentioned to them that it's her personal number. So they're assuming that they're just contacting her on her work phone. So that's one example. So it's just something to think about, think, what could we do? We mean well, we're trying to help, we're trying to be, a good colleague, but it can kind of slip and, go a bit too far sometimes, and it can be hard to adjust. So another example here, we've got a deals manager keeps asking him to do more tasks. He's struggling to find time but doesn't want to disappoint his manager. Adil keeps agreeing to do these tasks and is overwhelmed by his workload. It is affecting his home life, as often he ends up missing dinner in the week and he's not managing to spend time with his kids before they go to bed. Recently he even missed a deadline which he promised that he could make, and if Adil's team knew how much he was struggling, they may have been able to account for the delay and offer more support, but he just didn't feel comfortable letting them know that he needed some support. So again, another example there of how we can mean well, but sometimes it just kind of goes a little bit too far, and it ends up negatively impacting a lot more people than it ends up helping. And then last but not least, we've got Dave. So Dave recently caught the flu and he's feeling very under the weather. Dave knows he has a lot of deadlines coming up soon, and he is worried about burdening his team if he doesn't complete his work on time. So he decides to work from home instead of taking sick leave. Dave's able to get a little bit of work done, but because he hasn't rested properly, the illness has gone on for much longer than it otherwise would have, which has impacted the team even further. So now some of the other members of his team have actually got the flu as well. But because Dave didn't take sick leave, they're now feeling really pressured to also not take sick leave. So in this example, you can see how it just kind of spirals, and the pressure can kind of carry on to the rest of the team as well. So again, these aren't unusual. I've put poor boundaries examples, but I think these kind of things have happened to most of us at some point. So they're just some things to show that we mean well, but sometimes we just have to think a bit ahead. And although it can be hard to speak out at that time, it can really benefit us, but it can benefit our team as well. It can benefit everybody else around us. So it's definitely, not just about being selfish or doing what we want. It's kind of thinking about the greater good in a sense. So I hope that helps. Give some examples there. So moving on, again, just to kind of summarise what we could do in certain situations, and these are quite brief, and again, we've just kind of gone through a few examples today, but hopefully it kind of gives you something to go off that you can apply to different situations that you might be facing as well. So in terms of personal contact details, I would say at work, it's definitely best to avoid sharing your personal details wherever you can, even in that phase at first where maybe you don't have everything set up, because it can soon spread, and then again it's harder to go back and correct and ask people not to contact you on that number. But if that has happened, it's fine, just let them know that it is your personal number and to please contact you on your work number instead. Again, a lot of the time, if we imagine if someone said to us, oh sorry, that's actually my personal number, please could you contact me on this, we probably wouldn't be offended at all. And yeah, it can just feel a little bit scary, but hopefully it's better for everybody. And I think a lot of the time our colleagues, they would rather know, they don't want to be negatively affecting us, just as we would want to know if it was them as well. In terms of out of hours, so it's a really good idea to decide when you will switch off and try and kind of roughly always stick to that. So just so you've got that guideline in your head, turn your work phone off and turn your laptop off. So once you've decided it's time to stop, because otherwise, people see you're on and it keeps coming in, and then it's hard not to reply, not to get involved. I'd really recommend not having work emails or Teams calls or Microsoft Teams on your phone, because obviously things just come up. We might think we won't check it, or we'll turn off the notifications, but things always come up, or you kind of think, oh, get that little niggle and think, oh, I'll double check. So please, yeah, just try your best to avoid having it where you can. And you can always put your status away as well on Teams. So if you are on your laptop or you are on your phone, but maybe you're not actively working, that can help sometimes to just pop that on away. And in terms of social media, this is kind of coming from a place of being careful with social media and work. So if you're not sure if you want all your colleagues going on your social media, or you're not really sure about how to do that, of course one of the things that you can do is you could have a private account. You can obviously these days kind of mute people. If you don't feel comfortable blocking, you can mute them, so you can't really see what they're doing, and there's lots of different things that we can do. Quite a lot of people will just say in general, if it comes up in the topic about adding you on social media, you can just say, you've just got a rule, and you don't put colleagues on there. You don't have anything to do with work on social media, and I think most people will respect that, and a lot of people probably feel the same as well. Moving on to a few more points to bear in mind. So in terms of professionally saying no, I think this is one of the hardest things sometimes at work. But remember that there is only so much that you can do in one day. It's much better to let people know that you don't have time than to end up letting them down, just as we saw in that other example. People, I think, would rather know. If you can't do it in time, it's absolutely fine to say, sorry, I'm not going to be able to do this, I don't have capacity. But remember to just give an answer. Say, when you think you'll be able to get it done by. So just kind of give an alternative suggestion in there. Because when people say urgent, obviously, one person's urgent isn't urgent to another person. So yeah. And of course, delegate. If you can, if some of your team have a little bit more time, or maybe this point isn't as busy for them. We all have different busy points, and I'm sure we all want to support our team as well. So try your best to feel like you can ask, because again, if you ask them, they'll feel good helping you out as well if they've got time, and hopefully next time they'll feel comfortable doing it the other way around as well. So it's not just one-sided. In terms of personal and professional boundaries with colleagues, so again, this sort of links to the social media point as well, really, about finding that balance, because it's harder to go back. Of course, a lot of us become friends with our colleagues, which is great, and we spend a lot of time with them. One of the kind of good ways of escaping work, outside of work time, could be to agree that you'll email about work issues, but when you text, you just text about personal things. Or you could say to your friend, you could say, let's just have a rule that when we're out and we're socialising, we're having fun, we're not allowed to talk about work. And it can be as simple as that. And again, the other person will probably appreciate that as well, and they might not feel comfortable saying it. So it's just little things. It doesn't always have to be, really thought out, long process. It can just be little things like that. But when we've got that guideline in our head, it's just like a habit, and it just helps us to stick to it a little bit more. So finally, before we finish up today, I've just got some final tips on how to set boundaries to support you with setting your own boundaries moving forward. So first of all, we've got take time to decide your boundaries. Kind of have a think. You don't have to have a boundary about absolutely everything, but have a think about some of the key things in your life, perhaps challenges you've been having recently, maybe points of frustration, things that kind of keep coming up that it would be really helpful to kind of have that boundary in place for. Ideally, keep your boundary really short and concise, because this just makes it easier for us to remember, and it makes it easier for the other person to kind of absorb as well. And where you can, try and state it with confidence. Typically, it's something that you've thought about in advance, it's something that's important to you, it is a decision that you've made, not kind of something that's up for discussion. Although, as we've mentioned, of course, we can be a little bit flexible within that. Always try your best to be polite. Hopefully that will help it to go down well. And remember that you can always set a boundary later. So even if you're in a situation where, maybe you feel uncomfortable, or it didn't quite go how you wanted to, but you just didn't know what to say at the time and how to handle it, then that's fine. You can always think about it afterwards, reflect. You can send a message, send an email, talk to that person next time, and go from there. Another really important point to mention when it comes to setting boundaries is being realistic and also following through. So not all boundaries have kind of like a clear end, but as we chatted about earlier, for example, say if you were going to say to your relative, you know, I'm happy to have these discussions with you, but only if you're going to be respectful of my opinion, and if you know, kind of get disrespectful or you raise your voice, then I'm going to leave the conversation. If you have stated that as your boundary, and then you continue to still do the same thing and you don't leave the conversation, then there's not really any actions, any consequences of that. So it typically means that people won't take your boundaries seriously and they may try and cross them. So just bear that in mind as well, that when you are setting it, you want it to be realistic and something that you can actually follow through with. Another really important point is to just remember that you can't control someone else's reactions. So we can do our best to be flexible, to be polite, and to put it across well, but we are not in control of that. So if somebody responds badly to your boundary, just know it doesn't necessarily mean that it's because you did a bad job of setting your boundary. Sometimes it is just difficult for people to get used to that when it's quite new to them. And last of all, just to say that if you have liked this topic and you want to find out more information, you can take a look at the Joy of Being Selfish book by Michelle Elman. She also has social media and podcasts as well, and she is kind of the source of most of this information from her book. So yeah, we really hope you found this helpful today. If you do have any comments or any feedback, or if you'd like us to cover anything else, then please do email the ESS Wellness inbox, which is on this slide. But yeah, apart from that, thank you so much for watching today.